To understand what we're getting ourselves into here, we need to first understand what a renaissance is. A renaissance is the revival or renewed interest in something. The Renaissance is typically viewed in history as the revival of art through the 14th and 16th century. But what does that have to do with anything involving Splatoon 2? Well, I believe our funny Squid Game 2 experienced a little renaissance of its own between April 2020 to February 2021. Here's why. July 21st, 2019, the final Splatoon 2 Splatfest had concluded with a chaos win 3-0 against Team Order. Way to go, Team Order. This was set to be the last Splatoon 2 Splatfest. Splatoon 2 was officially done getting updates and support. We were all done until we got a new Splatoon game. The game was officially complete. Okay, yeah, that's a pretty obvious setup. So let's time skip a bit to April 21st, 2020. Nintendo announced that they'd be hosting a rerun Splatfest for Mayo vs. Ketchup that would be taking place from May 22nd through the 24th, around 10 months after the quote-unquote final Splatfest, and around 2 years and 9 months since the first Mayo vs. Ketchup Splatfest. The community was thrilled, to say the minimum. This was an unprecedented action from Nintendo. I know the question of why is this happening is a big one, and I will get into it later in the video. From the month wait between the announcement and the actual bonus Splatfest, the community had been revitalized to a point that we hadn't seen since the final Splatfest. I'd actually argue that the surprise of it all made the Mayo vs. Ketchup Splatfest an even more exciting Splatfest than the final fest, but I already made a video on that and you can click the iCard if you really want to watch it. I'd recommend it, it's a really good video, but I might be a little biased there. But anyways, Mayo vs. Ketchup rerun ends with a Ketchup victory against Mayo 2-1. But at the end of the Splatfest, a sentiment lingered that this wasn't the end, that there were still more Splatfests to come. The data miner Oatmeal Dome looked into the files to Splatoon Update 5.1.0 and found new data about a Splatfest codenamed SEL. This update was important because why would Nintendo be adding a new Splatfest to the game files months after they had already said they were done updating the game and making Splatfests? Another notable point about SEL Splatfest is that it had 4 shifty stations that were supposed to rotate throughout the Splatfest. Those maps were the Bunker Games, Cannonfire Pearl, the Bounty Twins, and the Chronicles of Rolonium. None of these maps were the other shifty stations that were available during the Mayo vs. Ketchup Splatfest rerun. Officially, as of the end of Mayo vs. Ketchup 2, there was no word on whether or not there would be any more Splatfests, but the community didn't give up hope that there could be more Splatfests coming based off of what we'd seen from the data mine. And on July 21st, 2020, the 3rd anniversary of Splatoon 2, we finally got the answer to what would be the fate of the bonus Splatfest theory. On that day, Nintendo posted on Twitter saying, "We're taking another crack at the classic conundrum of which came first, the chicken or the egg. And make sure to stay fresh, because 2 more bonus Splatfests will be arriving before the end of March 2021. This news was shocking, to say the least. On the 1-year anniversary of Splatfest ending, Nintendo announced 3 more. Needless to say, the Splatoon community lost it over this news. But for now, the attention was on the upcoming chicken vs. egg, which was to take place 1 month later in August 2020. Hype was expressed pretty similarly to how the last bonus Splatfest was. Videos were made, art pieces were done, and all over, the community was just super happy to see the renewed support in Splatoon 2 again. Which leads us to August. The Splatfest went over relatively normally, with chicken winning 2-1 against egg, which resulted in some pretty strange dialogue from Pearl. With the end of the Splatfest, we were left with a few questions. What Splatfest was next, and where was the SEL Splatfest? Chicken vs. Egg 2 had the Bunker Games, but none of the other 3 maps. People tried speculating on what Splatfest would come next, but ultimately, no one found out until Nintendo announced on October 9th, 2020, that a few weeks later from then, they'd be rerunning Trick vs. Treat Splatfest. And they weren't just bringing back a normal Splatfest, they brought back the whole Splatoween Splatfest shebang. The Splatoween Square, which IMO is the weakest of the Splatfest squares compared to these 2 gems, but it's still pretty cool. The Splatoween Battle Jingle, the Splatoween Graffiti, and most importantly, the Splatoween Gear. This was important to new players that had missed the original Splatoween, which had taken place around 3 years ago, I believe, and have wanted to get it since. This took place from October 30th to November 1st, and ended in a Treat victory 2-1. This was one of the weaker Splatfests in my opinion. That's not to say it was bad, because it certainly wasn't, especially if you missed the first one in 2018, and wanted to get the Splatoween gear. So, right now, we've got 1 more Splatfest coming before March 2021, but none of our questions have been answered yet from earlier. What would Splatoon 2's true final Splatfest be, And what is SEL? Well, actually, the answer to both was answered before the Splatfest even happened for Splatoween. September 3rd, 2020, Nintendo announces the Mario 35th anniversary. But this is a Splatoon video, so we're here to talk about Splatoon stuff. Nintendo announced that Mario 35 Splatfest, Super Mushroom vs. Superstar. But that's not all. They also announced 2 real-life Splatfest t-shirts for both Splatfest teams, keychains representing both teams, and commemorative coins for anyone who ranks top 35 in Splatfest Pro matches for the US. The stage was set for this to be the best Splatfest ever. The hype for the true final Splatfest was insane, people posting pictures of themselves in their Splatfest tees, along with all the typical displays of hype we've seen from the other Splatfests were all present. However, for 68.2% of the Splatfest players, it was a dud of a Splatfest to go out on. Nintendo's choice and power-ups were so out of each other's leagues to the point where 2/3 of the population were all on one team. Like, dude, the Mushroom and Star aren't even in the same league at all. If they did something, it should have been like Firefly versus Star, because it could have given a much closer comparison. Or maybe Super Mushroom versus 1-Up Mushroom. But nope, they chose Big Mario versus literal invincibility. I made a whole video on why the Splatfest was bad, so I'm not going to get into it here. If you want to check it out, once again, probably one of the best videos on this website, but like I said, I could be a little biased. So I said in the title for this time period, these 4 bonus Splatfests, that they created the renaissance of Splatoon 2. Why? Well, the short answer is community, but the real answer is what makes this game. Splatoon is a live service game. It's an evolving world that keeps growing and growing, and there's 2 key factors that make this game a living world and keep it alive. Those 2 factors are development and community. After the final Splatfest, interest in Splatoon dipped down. People were moving on to other games now that Splatoon 2 was finished. That's not to say that everyone left, but there was a very big noticeable shift in the community after the final fest. And it's not a bad thing, it's a pretty normal thing for a live service game to start falling off in popularity after its support has ended. Only difference here is when a normal live service game stops getting support like Destiny, it's because the next entry in the series is about to come out. However, that was not the case with Splatoon. In fact, the first piece of news after the final fest ended was that Splatoon 3 was not in active development and not even considered by Nintendo yet. This of course was a lie, but we wouldn't know that till 2 years later. But regardless, the development stopped and the community moved on. But when the development came back with the announcement of another Splatfest in April, the community rushed back to the game, creating an environment and a community that wasn't seen since July 2019. And for some reason, the community stuck around for a while after April. And I believe that that was due to the hype that was able to linger for 2 months between the end of the first bonus Splatfest and the announcement of 3 more, because of the mystery of SEL, which I don't think I clarified on was the Mushroom vs. Star Splatfest. Mushroom vs. Star used the 4 shifty stations found in SEL, making it the SEL Splatfest. But it was the potential of another bonus Splatfest after the first one that was enough to carry the community on to the next Splatfest announcement. Though the Mushroom vs. Star Splatfest didn't go out the way it should have, the community didn't have to wait long to get its next rejuvenation, its biggest one yet. 1 month after the true final Splatfest, Nintendo revealed Splatoon 3, thus concluding the renaissance of Splatoon 2 the best way possible. The renaissance of Splatoon 2 was so much fun to me, and it was really a big thing that really got me through that time period where we all had to stay inside. So talking about it in a video like this makes me really happy to share the memories of what happened with the people who also lived through it, and to the people who had never seen it before, so they get an explanation of what came before them. And while on the subject of the great everyone stay inside, it's time to answer the question that I asked earlier. Why did we get all these bonus Splatfests? Well, obviously it's because we all had to stay indoors and not travel, but I believe personally that Nintendo didn't just give us Splatfest just because we had to get Splatfest to stay indoors. I think Nintendo knew they were going to need to delay Splatoon 3 due to staying at home and no one was going to go to work. So rather than make the Splatoon community wait with no hope in sight for their favorite game, they threw some Splatfests at us while we wait. And a belief that I hold that you don't have to agree with, I think Splatoon 3 was supposed to release in 2020 and have the Mario Splatfest be a Splatfest in Splatoon 3 rather than let it be a Splatfest in Splatoon 2, which would explain the really weird choices in shifty stations, but I have literally zero evidence to back this up, so don't take this as gospel. But anyways, that is it for me, gamers. If you like super cool videos like this, then make sure to check out my channel. I am super close to 10k subscribers, and if you are already subscribed, make sure you have that bell on. It really helps out. Alright gamers, I will see everyone later. Bye.